Friends, Romans, countrymen, and women, lend me your ears, because this is the third language investigation video that we're going to be doing. So we're assuming that you've got some interesting ideas for your language investigation swilling around your brain and that you've been collecting some data. Okay, so in this one, we're going to be having a think about what secondary reading that you need to be doing, and secondly, how to draft a question, and then thirdly, what different levels of analysis that you're going to be applying to your data. So let's kick off with this thorny question. Where can I find relevant secondary reading for my language investigation? Now, the first instinct is to run to the internet, of course, but I say to you, not so fast. Have a think about these things. First of all, use your textbook. Your textbook is excellent. And if you look in your booklet from page 14 onwards, I've taken the trouble to go through the entire textbook and to have listed all of the different concepts and theories that are in there. So first stop is to go through those and think, well, do any of those link in with my language investigations? So we have categories of meanings and representations. We have CLUD, children's language development, both the speech and the writing. We have all the language diversity chapter with its different areas of regional variation, language and age, language and gender, remember that? Language and occupation. There's even a little bit on language and sexuality. And then finally, we've got language change. Now, it may well be that you're doing an investigation into some kind of language that's a bit older, in which case you want to be perusing from page 190 onwards, because that's the language change section of the textbook. Now, we haven't covered that yet. We're going to be doing language change after Christmas, but there may be things in there that will help you do an analysis of an older text. Okay, so use your textbook. Use the list that I've constructed there in the booklet. Think about your own course booklets and notes from the year and a half that you've been studying English language A level. So there may be things burrowed away in your notes there which could be useful. Use our magical red boxes, which are full of English language books. Okay, so they're in the classroom, there to be used. Go to eMagazine. eMagazine is a wonderful thing. eMagazine is a magazine that is designed especially for you, because it's made for English language A-level and English literature A-level students. So if we look online at the latest edition, eMagazine 89, my eyes are lighting up because I see that there is an interview with the one and only David Crystal. So there's an English language article. And I also see that there's something here about narrative, beginnings, middles and ends, sequence and organization in narrative, which could be relevant to your particular language investigation. So you need a username and a password to get in on the site, which will tell you when you're in class. But eMagazine is a really good resource for you to be using. I'll come out of there and I'll go back to my list. Of course, you're going to be trawling the net for academic websites, but make sure that the websites that you choose are right for you as a sixth form, A-level student. Because lots of websites that are out there are basically for undergraduates, postgraduates, and therefore they may not be the right level for you. And then finally, just have a trawl of what kind of audio, visual materials, videos, podcasts that are out there which may be relevant to your topic. I'm thinking of the BBC Radio 4 excellent series Word of Mouth with Michael Rosen. Now, what a fantastic podcast that is. Okay, so make sure that you are doing sufficient research at the same time as you're collecting your data, making sure that your interest in the subject is bolstered by this secondary reading. Okay, let's have a think about drafting your question. We've got to get this right. If you get your question right, then it sets you off in the right direction. Here's an example of a student question. How do older people use language in different ways to appeal to their listeners when representing autobiographical anecdotes? Right, this is a previous student of mine who worked in a care home and therefore interviewed and transcribed anecdotes that some of the residents in the care home told. And she was really interested in the differences between the anecdotes and how they differed according to their gender and perhaps elements of social class as well. Okay, so there's her question that she's asked. It's a good question. It's a good question because she's used the word language in the question. This is an English language investigation. It's not media studies. It's not sociology. It's not history. It's language. So make sure that you've got the word language or linguistic in your question. What else is good about it? It's got the word different in different ways. And so different suggests variety and contrast. That's good. Variety and contrast, those are the sorts of things that we want to see in the language investigation. It also draws attention to the mode because it uses this noun listeners. And that's obviously an important aspect of the context, that what she's done is she's collected spontaneous speech. And then finally, the other thing about it is that she has used this verb represent. So represent is a good word to use. We know that because it's there in your paper 1 section A in the question that's being asked there. And what it really suggests is that the person is presenting a version of reality, and they're doing that in order to position the audience's response. So it's a really, really good AO3 concept. Okay, so there's your template for how to put together the question. We're now going to have a think about your actual introduction. Now, your introduction is very important because it's kind of like your shop window, isn't it? It's, your examiner is picking up your language investigation and you want them to be thrilled and entertained and influenced by your introduction. Okay, so you're going to start with the kind of rationale behind your topic choice. So why have you chosen, out of all the millions of different topics you could have chosen, why have you alighted upon this? Why did you go for this particular data? And what are you trying to find out? Okay, and this is important. You've got to give that sense of discovery, that you're on a mission, you're on a journey to find something out. And you haven't just chosen it because you're interested in that data. You're genuinely trying to find something out. Okay, so it may well be that this is the point where you explain, look, I have this career aspiration in such an area, and that's why I've chosen this data. Or that I have ambitions to go on to a certain undergraduate course, and that's why I've chosen this data. So try and link it in with your kind of future intentions. You then need to be drawing attention to some of the most important contextual influences on the language. So you might be using the words mode or genre or audiences or purposes, or it may well be that you're drawing attention to something of the wider social or historical context behind your data. So this is the place to do it very early on in your introduction. You then need to be referring to any relevant research and AO2 ideas. This is where your wide reading comes into play. So if you've done some interesting wide reading, you should be able to pick out 2 or 3 theories or concepts that you think are going to play a part in your actual investigation. And then finally, I'd say on this, you've got to aim for a really compact, uncluttered written style. And you're going to have to draft and redraft and redraft. It's not going to be perfect to start with, and you're really going to hone it down. It's a bit like working on a piece of poetry where you're kind of saying every word counts. So it needs to be compact. It needs to be uncluttered. It needs to be objective rather than subjective. So you don't want to be using the first person singular pronoun I a lot. You want to be using the passive voice. And it's got to be report style. Let's have a look at a couple of examples of introductions which I think are pretty good. This investigation explores how the scriptwriters of Brooklyn Nine-Nine use language to establish humorous representations of character in its pilot episode. You'll see how in only about 20 words, this is setting out entirely what this investigation is about. Okay, it's using the present tense there. It doesn't say I explored. It says this investigation explores. It's depersonalized. Okay. It talks about notice how the punctuation, by the way, there is done in a completely standardized way. So if it's a title of something, then it's going to have single inverted commas around it, and it's going to have capital letters in the right places. And it's drawing attention to the humorous representations of character. So it's using the word representation in that first line. So we're off to a good start. A key contextual factor of this data is its contemporary timescale, produced in the USA in 2013 at the time of heightening tensions surrounding the Black Lives Matter campaign. This study examines the representations of police behaviour in this charged atmosphere and explores whether stereotypes about authority figures are conformed to or subversive. Now that's brilliant. You know, they're saying something that's really interesting about the context. They're saying, hey, this comedy that I'm looking at is American, and it was produced in 2013. And historically and socially, that's quite an important time because we've got the Black Lives Matter campaign happening at this time, and we've got heightened tension. And therefore, it's really interesting to look at the way that police behaviour in this comedy is being represented in this particular timescale. Okay, so it's saying something interesting about context in that first paragraph. The investigation was fueled by a consideration of the influence of the text's entertainment purpose and whether this has been reflected in the constructed representations. This links to my personal aspiration of following an undergraduate course and future career in the media industry. So the student here is drawing attention to the purpose, saying that, you know, the text's main function is entertainment, and therefore that's going to play a big part in the language. But she's also done a personal thing here where she's told us that actually she's going to go on to a future, an undergraduate course and a career in the media industry. So it's a kind of plausible explanation about why she's chosen this particular topic. The third and final paragraph. The study was aided by reference to Alison Ross's The Language of Humour and The Language of Jokes, Analysing Verbal Play by Delia Chiara, which both explore the influence of the incongruity theory. Ross discusses how scriptwriters' subversion of expectations, such as the flouting of Grice's maxims, can both surprise and amuse audiences. Chiaro cited the work of Beer, which claimed that ethnic minorities are often presented as the butt of jokes, as they threaten the, quote, white middle-class American hegemony. Brilliant. So we've got reference here to research. They've clearly gone off, this student has gone off and read some stuff around her topic. She's alighted upon these two different studies, and she's plausibly linked it in with a study about comedy. So she said something about the Ross book, and she's linked it in with Grice's maxims, and she said something also about Chiaro as well. So she set up her investigation in a really lovely way. Here's a second example. This investigation explores children's written development over time within the narrative storytelling genre to fulfill the teacher's aims within the classroom setting. Investigating a child language development topic enabled me to consolidate and develop my CLD knowledge for the English Paper 1 Section B unit. That's a great opening paragraph. In the first sentence, just as in the previous one, in about 20 words, she just summarises exactly what this language investigation is all about. And she also says that, look, one of the reasons why I've chosen this is because it gives me the opportunity to consolidate and develop my existing knowledge on children's language development. The investigation focused upon my sister's narrative writing through 3 years of primary school in Key Stage 2 from 7 to 10 years old. The writing was completed in a classroom setting, contextualised by topic-based classwork, images and learning objectives, acting as prompts for the narratives. The study focused on the impact of adult intervention on children's writing, an area explored by the Russian educationalist Lev Vygotsky. All you need is Lev, with his focus on the influence of the MKO, the more knowledgeable otter, in moving the child through the ZPD, the zone of proximal development. Now, she's doing a great job here, isn't she? Because she's telling you about the context of this, you know, where she's got her data from, but she's also linking it in with relevant kind of theory. So she's done an absolutely brilliant job in that second paragraph. Previous studies into CLD acted as a catalyst for the investigation. Nice topic sentence. Theories such as Barry Kroll's stages of writing development and Richard Gentry's spelling stages were initially applied to the data, opening the debate of how closely the narratives related to the proposed stages. Jean Routhery's research about genre types also proved important in analysing the child's level of success in achieving narrative stylistic features. Great. So she's name-checked 3 particular theorists who she knows about and you know about, i.e. Kroll, Gentry and Rothery. And she's signalling that they are going to play a significant part in her investigation. Okay, so 200 words. Notice how, she hasn't used this first person singular pronoun, except for maybe once you saying my. So, it's completely detached and objective what she's written. It feels like report style. I'm going to talk about one last thing, because once you've done your introduction, then you need to put together, well, what are the areas that you specifically are going to be analysing under the different language levels? So let me talk you through an example of this. So we're going back to this question about how do older people use language in different ways when narrating anecdotal experiences. So this is the girl who went to the care home and taped the residents talking about experiences of theirs. So if you were that student, then what language levels would you be drawing upon? And within those language levels, what questions would you be asking? The thing to do is to go back to your booklet and to look at the list of key terms on pages 12 through to, 12 to 13, and think about, well, which of those areas are you going to be applying to your data? So if I were you, I'd stop the video there and I would scribble down, in this particular instance, which language levels and which questions within those language levels would you be applying? Okay, I am assuming that you've done that, but remember that assuming makes an ass out of you and me. Right, so here's the question again, and this is what she did. So under discourse, she decided, right, under discourse, I'm going to think about narrative structure and I'm going to think about speech features. When I'm looking at narrative structure, I want to be looking at patterns. What are the kind of recurring patterns that are going across these anecdotes? How do they begin their stories? How do they develop their stories? How do these speakers end their stories? Do they do it in similar or different ways? Do these patterns adhere to Labov or Goodwin's narrative structures? And if you're sitting there thinking, who? Then shame upon you, because Labov or Goodwin are dealt with in some depth in the textbook under discourse on page 51 onwards. Secondly, speech features. So she was interested in whether dialogue played a part in these speeches. So do the narrators use dialogue to reveal more about participants' personality or mood? Okay, so there's your discourse. Then she thought we can have some fun with phonology. So look, what about prosodic features and what about accent? On prosodic features, what she was interested in was what kind of variations are the speakers doing with their voice in order to engage with their audiences at different moments in their stories. So what sorts of things are they doing with their intonation and volume and tempo and pitch at different parts of the narrative? Secondly, on phonology, she was also thinking about accent as well. So what variations are there in the use of accent features to convey meaning? Okay, so discourse and phonology, she thought those would be interesting areas to be looking at. She also thought that lexis would be quite important. So she thought that semantic fields would be looked at and how these semantic fields create meanings and representations. So she'd be honing in on the connotations of particular words and thinking about how they create meanings and representations. She'd be looking at different word classes. Are there, for example, pre-modifying adjectives which are doing a certain thing in any of these anecdotes? So how are certain word classes being used to draw emotional responses? And also she thought, well, formality might be quite useful because you might get quite interesting contrasts or shifts in levels of formality as these stories go on. At which point you then enlist the help of Martin Jauss, yet another researcher that you're going to find in the textbook there. And finally, last but by no means least, grammar. Yes, under grammar, you could think about standard English. So to what extent are these speakers actually using standard English? Or actually, do they use quite a hefty amount of non-standard dialectical forms? And how does that impact on the success of the story that's being told? Under grammar, you could look at adverbs and adverbials. So the part being played by adverbials, how are they affecting the meanings? And then you could drill down into verbs and look to see what's going on with the verbs. Is the passive voice being used for any effects by the speakers, for example? Or do the speakers use the progressive aspect of the verb, meaning it's got an ing ending on it? And how do they affect the representations? Okay, so what I'm saying to you is once you've drafted your introduction, then you do need a single sheet of paper in which you do a similar thing to these last two slides, in which you identify your language levels and the questions that you are going to be applying to your investigation. Once you've done all of those things, you obviously need to be showing us what you come up with. And then in the next video, we'll be thinking about how to draft your actual first language level. So thank you. I hope that's been useful for you.